Okay, hello everyone. I think we're ready to begin. Welcome to tonight's Planning and Development Control Committee meeting. My name is Councillor Omid Miri. I am the chair of the meeting. I'm just going to run through some housekeeping points. The meeting is being live streamed to the council's YouTube page, so by participating, you're consenting to being recorded. If the fire alarm sounds either continuously or intermittently, I will adjourn the meeting. Please leave the meeting in an orderly fashion by the staff fire exit, which is behind me to my right, and officers will direct you to the assembly point. And there are toilets on my left-hand side. Also, before people speak, could they please make sure that their mics are on, and it's just the button on the right-hand side of the mic, but I will remind everyone before they do so. Okay, now we move on to item 1, which is apologies for absence, and we do have apologies from councillors Ross Melton and Alex Carmel. If that can be recorded, please. We're moving on to item 2, declaration of interests. Do members have any declarations of interest?
Yes, thank you. On the item item number 5, Portlington Lodge, I am a trustee of Hammersmith United Charities, which owns and administers John Bett House, which is on the other side of the road, and is mentioned in the report as having been assessed for any impact on residents. I will be staying for the discussion, but as a result, I will not be voting on the item.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Toulouse. And moving on to item 3, minutes of the meeting held on the 4th of June 2024. Are the minutes agreed? Agreed. Okay, wonderful. If that could be recorded as well. Now, I'm going to slightly reorder the agenda. I'm going to bring item 5 to be the next item, which is Pocklington Lodge. And therefore, I would like to ask the presenting officer, Anissa Aboud, please, when you're ready to introduce the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. The next item on the agenda is Pocklington Lodge on Rylett Road, W12 9PQ. Your attention is drawn to the addendum, which contains a number of corrections. More specifically, the drawing numbers listed in condition 2 have been updated, and under the heads of terms, the restriction on the occupation of the new units for people who are certified as blind or visually impaired has been revised. The proposal seeks permission for the demolition of rear buildings, including Warden's Bungalow, erection of a new 2-storey Muse building to provide 4 one-bed new residential units, and Part 1, Part 2-storey upward extension to Pocklington Lodge to provide 15 one-bed additional residential units for blind and visually impaired persons, including a new cycle storage, a refuse storage, new landscaping and amenity space, a new dog run, fenestration changes to the existing building, and other associated works. The application site is located on the corner of Rylett Road and Goldhawk Road. The existing building is 3 stories with an additional loft level and contains 50 self-contained studio flats for blind or visually impaired people, and is owned by the Thomas Pocklington Trust charity. To the western side of Rylett Road sits John Bett's House, a sheltered housing development. That's this building right here. This is another substantial building, 2 stories in height with a loft level. The remainder of Rylett Road is predominantly made up of 2-storey detached and semi-detached Victorian dwellings. Adjacent to the site to the east lie numbers 300 and 302 Goldhawk Road. That's these 2 buildings right here. These are 4 stories, including semi-basement dwellings, and are taller than the existing Pocklington Lodge building. The image on screen shows the aerial image of the site. In terms of heritage assets, the site is located in the Ravenscourt and Starch Green Conservation Area. There are a number of locally listed buildings of merit nearby, including numbers 300 and 302 Goldhawk Road, and the entire terrace on the south side of Goldhawk Road runs through number 279 to 309 Goldhawk Road. The photos on screen show the existing street frontage along Goldhawk Road, and the image on the bottom shows the site frontage on the corner of Goldhawk Road and Rylett Road. These photos show the rear elevation of Pocklington Lodge, as well as the Warden's Bungalow, which is to be demolished. The image on screen shows the proposed site plan. This is the proposed ground floor plan. As you can see, the two main existing entrances remain on Goldhawk Road and Violet Road. That's these two right here. The new dog run will be located to the rear northwestern corner of the site. This would provide space for assistant/guide dogs to be exercised as needed. That's this top corner right here. The demolition of the rear buildings will allow for the expansion and improvement of the courtyard to include new landscaping, planting and seating areas, resulting in an additional 137 meters squared of communal amenity space. It is part of the proposal to expand the bin storage capacity on site. The existing bin store is located on Violet Road on the southwest corner of the site. That's this corner right here. No new car parking spaces are proposed as part of the development. This is the proposed first floor plan. This is the proposed second floor plan. As you can see, the new Muse building would have a green roof and PV panels. This is the proposed third floor plan, which contains the new units. 15 of the 19 new flats proposed would include private amenity space of a minimum of 5 square meters and a minimum depth of 1.5 meters. This is the proposed fourth floor plan, and the new 41 square meters rooftop terrace can be seen here. That's this element right here. This creates a total of 338.6 square meters of communal amenity space on the site. The proposed roof plan shows the new green roof and the solar PV panels on Pocklington Lodge. These are the proposed east and west elevations. These are the proposed north elevations looking into the courtyard. These are the proposed street visuals from Goldhawk Road as well as from Violet Road. These are the proposed elevations of the Muse building. These are the proposed 3D visuals. In terms of accessibility, the new units will be accessed internally from the existing stairwell and the existing lift to the new proposed third and fourth floors. The wheelchair accessible dwellings would be the 2 ground floor units in the Muse building, which are M432B compliant, and the rest of the proposed units are accessible and adaptable dwellings M42 compliant. The wheelchair units would have level access and direct access to private external amenity space. In terms of neighbour amenity, full details are outlined in paragraph 7.5 to 7.18 on pages 60 to 63 of the agenda report. To summarise, the nearest properties are to the east, numbers 300 and 302 Goldhawk Road, which are a pair of 4-storey, including semi-basement level villas. Both have generous rear gardens that extend northwards adjacent to the lodge's current courtyard amenity space. Number 302, that's this building right here, has 5 windows in the flank elevation. However, these are non-habitable room windows. In terms of the impact of the development, in terms of overshadowing of adjacent gardens and amenity spaces, both gardens of 300 and 302 Goldhawk Road would retain at least 2 hours of sunlight on the 21st of March, and both gardens would satisfy BRE guidelines of sun on the ground. In terms of consultation responses, as part of the application process, 259 notification letters have been sent out to residents of Pocklington Lodge and neighbouring residents, including a site notice and a press notice. As a result of these consultations, 10 objections have been received, 7 of which are from Pocklington Lodge residents, including the residents group. Within the Tenants Association, the response from the Tenants Association confirms that they surveyed 43 out of 50 current tenants. 31 of them object, 5 are in support, and 7 are neutral. These are detailed in paragraph 2.2 of the report on page 48 of the agenda report. Some of the concerns have already been addressed, but to summarise, the objections mainly relate to the adequacy of facilities, including sufficient amenity space for all residents. Officers note the proposal results in a total of 338.6 square meters of communal amenity space. The application was also presented to the Inclusive Design Review Panel in March of this year. Overall, panel members were broadly supportive of the scheme, and full details are outlined in paragraph 1.16 to 1.17 of the report. In terms of the heads of terms, the proposed development would warrant a carbon offset payment of £6,692, an air quality monitoring fee, a construction logistics plan monitoring fee, and a travel plan monitoring fee. The proposal will be car-free. And lastly, the Section 106 agreement will require clauses to ensure that the new units will only be occupied by blind and visually impaired people. In conclusion, officers consider the principle of intensification of residential use for blind and visually impaired people to be appropriate on this site. In terms of design, the scale and massing is appropriate in the site context. No demonstrable harm to residential amenity in terms of outlook, daylight, sunlight, privacy, or noises identified. The proposed development would be car-free and would provide 2 wheelchair-accessible dwellings. For these reasons, officers recommend the application for approval subject to the conditions listed in the report, including the changes noted in the addendum and successful completion of the Section 106 agreement.
Okay, thank you very much, Anissa. Thank you for that. Now, I believe we have a number of speakers. First of all, is Janet Stonehouse here? Janet, if you'd like to speak, you have 5 minutes. If you just come to this, yeah, exactly.
Thank you. There, and I think it's on green already.
Yeah, that's right. It's on already. And Janet, whenever you're ready, you have 5 minutes to speak. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chairman, especially for letting me speak so late in the day. I think I'm really speaking on behalf of our Tenants Association Chairman, Andrew. And what we would like to say is that we welcome the redevelopment of the bungalow into 4 flats, and that will give extra accommodation to blind people. But we are concerned about the main building. The reasons are safety is one, both in the construction, as it's a very small site, or restricted site is better said, and also within the building, when it is being done, it will be extremely noisy and very disorientating for us as blind people, the noise, and to the dogs that are there. And also, of course, the dust that comes with it. But it's mainly the disorientation that we are very concerned about. And another reason is that perhaps the impact of having extra people who can't see within the area. At the moment, people are very good, very helpful, but extra 15 people is a lot. And those are the main things that we want to stress, that the noise, the disorientation, the safety in construction, and the impact.
Okay, thank you very much, Janet. Thank you for your time. Thank you. Thank you very much. So I believe now we have Charles Colquhoun, CEO of the Thomas Pocklington Trust, and Pamela Longhurst Pierce. You have 5 minutes between you, however you'd like to divvy that up, and go ahead when you're ready. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And just a quick thank you for your time for considering our application. We are, as I think you know, we have quite a few properties in this borough, and it's a great honour to be here. It is our duty as an organisation, as I think you all know, to do everything we can to maximise the benefits of blind and partially sighted people throughout the country. That absolutely includes the residents of Pocklington Lodge, but it also includes the many blind and partially sighted people who live in the UK. And we think this is a very exciting opportunity for us to be able to provide accommodation for more blind and partially sighted people in this borough. We absolutely understand the residents' reservations about the disruption. We understand that. But we believe that that is manageable. We also believe that actually, if we don't do something like this at some time, the building is going to need to be rebuilt, on an occasion. So I think that's all I want to say. And Pamela, over to you.
Good evening, Chair, members. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. As you know, I'm the agent acting on behalf of the Trust dealing with this application. I have reviewed the officer's report, recommending the approval of this application subject to conditions. I think we endorse the contents and conclusions of the report as it addresses the issues relevant to the application in a clear and concise manner, drawing on expertise and advice from the council's team, as well as the officer's professional opinion. As you may be aware, a previous application was submitted in 2020 seeking additional accommodation on the site in a way of an upward extension. This application is effectively a resubmission of that application. That application was refused by reasons of poor design and negative visual impact, unsatisfactory levels of private amenity space for the new occupants, and just due to lack of sufficient information regarding drainage, fire safety, and daylight and sunlight impact. Since this refusal, the applicant has made important changes to the scheme to directly address the reasons for refusal. Notably, the design of the scheme has been developed and significantly improved from that previously proposed, taking into consideration feedback received from tenants. Extensive consultation has been carried out, not only with tenants, but also from engaging with the Hammersmith Society, who now consider the scheme to be sensitively designed to its urban context and addresses all the priorities of the conservation area. All the new proposed residential dwellings will benefit from private amenity space. Quality of accommodation has definitely improved. Quality and quantity of communal amenity space will be considerably improved with new landscaping, planting, and sitting areas, with an overall increase of 178 square meters of communal space for the use of existing and new occupants. It has been already detailed how the scheme does not affect the amenity of any neighboring property. All residential units are designed to high standards and will benefit from a separate bedroom, which aids future occupiers with wayfinding. Pocklington Lodge is a residential building with 50 studios, which opened in October 1968, and it has remained in the trust since its opening, providing affordable residential accommodation for those blind and visually impaired. The proposal will result in a net uplift of 16 new units, of which 2 are proposed to be fully wheelchair accessible, so that improves the accessibility of the site. Given the shortage of dedicated facilities for the visually impaired locally and within the wider London area, we consider that the proposal will meet an important identified need. The provision of housing choice for visually impaired people should be welcome to enable them to live independently, embrace normalization, integrate with mainstream society, and improve their overall wellness. I think on the basis of that and the content of the officer's report, I respectfully request that members support the recommendation of officers and approve the application as set out in the committee report. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your time. If you'd like to go back to your seats, thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, great. Now we can move to committee members' questions to officers. Anissa, I'd like to start by asking you about something in the addendum, which is paragraph 15.8, clause 7, the affordable housing viability assessment. Can you just clarify, will that cover, if you could actually just speak a bit about that as well for the benefit of everyone here, but will that cover just the additional new units, or will that cover the whole block? Because in the event, you know, which may or may not happen, and I'm not speculating on that, in the event that the new units are sort of sold off by the trust, we wouldn't want a situation where, you know, the top floor is luxury flats and then the rest is still housing for visually impaired people. And I see that this clause sort of prevents that from happening. But if you could just speak a little bit more about that.
That's right, Chair. The purpose of this clause is to ensure that the council is able to secure an affordable housing contribution for the uplift in residential flats in the event in the future where the property, the units change hands, or there's a change in circumstances where the trust is no longer the owner of these flats, and the applicant has agreed to these. So this will be fleshed out. The details of the wording will be fleshed out between the solicitors, but the clause is there to ensure that any future affordable housing contribution is secured by the council.
Sure, thank you. And you know, we're familiar with affordable housing viability assessments and things of this nature. I note the last sentence, this change of use will need to be agreed with the council. In that instance, would this come back to planning committee, or will that be decided by officers under delegated authority? Either Anissa or legal, if you'd like to answer that question.
So in my view, it doesn't need to come back to committee, because if it is granted, we are authorising the 106 on those terms, so that it can be, if it is sold on the open market, that an affordable housing contribution will be secured. So in my view, it doesn't need to come back to committee unless the chair, for some reason, wants it to be brought back to committee.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you very much.
So, Chair, I would
yes,
just add through
yeah.
that's not unusual. We have viability reviews on a number of large-scale projects where it's left to officers to work with consultants to negotiate what the review mechanism would deliver in terms of an affordable housing contribution, either as financial for off-site or on-site.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I'm familiar with that. I ask more because of the sensitivity of this site and the sensitivity around the residents, and it may be good in the event that this happens, and it may or may not happen, that we have an added level of oversight, but that's for a future discussion. Okay, any other questions? Yes, Councillor Chabot-Verdier.
Thank you, Chair. A few questions for me, but first I wanted to start by thanking officers for having shown great diligence on this application. Roy, you'll remember you showed great diligence when we talked about the residents for people who suffer from dementia, and I think each of you have been very elegant in the way that you treat a difficult topic and presented information to us. So thank you for this, and to Charles and his team for ensuring that the venue is accessible tonight, which wasn't the easiest of tasks. I'm very thankful to all officers for their work. In knowing that co-production remains a key principle of the functioning of our council, and the second year in a row we're in a mayoral agenda of equity and equality. I wanted to ask maybe a number of questions, if you can try and maybe answer them as a whole. But I wanted to start with, I think I'm very thankful to the speaker. And again, I think to the applicant, it's quite hard to criticize or say anything about what you do and the noble work you do and how you contribute to our society. Nonetheless, it felt a bit as if the two interventions weren't speaking to one another, and I think there could have been an opportunity to address some of the concerns that were raised by the resident, who I thank for their intervention. So starting with some of the conditions. So for those who have access to the pack on page 34, it says that no development shall commence until a preliminary risk assessment report is submitted. Obviously, we have residents who have very specific needs, and I think we all understand what has been said tonight about the problem of orientation and the impact the works would have on residents of the lodge in a way they perhaps wouldn't have on any residents elsewhere. Could you tell me how these assessments will take into account the specific needs of the residents of the lodge? I'm going to continue because I think you could probably address some of my questions in as a whole. Afterwards, we often talk about how we display contractor information. Obviously, this would need to be displayed in a different format, made available to residents, newsletters where the templates can be read by machine readable programs. What do you have planned to ensure that communications remain accessible to residents? Moving forward, we often ensure that there are resident and contractor meetings during which residents can feedback on how the works are going. So what is the council going to do to ensure that there are resident meetings with the contractors in the course of the construction? And will those discussions go after construction's over? Because I know you've talked to us a little bit about this, about the interior of the building and the refurbishment, need for refurbishment that has been expressed by some residents. And finally, again, in the consultation feedback, which is mentioned in the pack, it says the new tenants of the building will require orientation training in the area. This service is usually provided by the council. It is already overstretched. Disruption to health and safety during the construction of the new homes was also mentioned as an issue. So what conditions or mechanisms are there in this application to ensure that we cover all of these bases? I appreciate a lot of the questions, so please don't hesitate to let me know if you want me to repeat any. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair. I thank you for your opportunity because some of the questions or concerns you've raised dovetail quite nicely with the concerns raised by the resident. Primarily in terms of answering your question around construction safety, etc., you'll notice that one of the conditions, condition 25, relates to a demolition and construction logistics plan and details of that. And at the moment, it's our standard condition. But what I would suggest that what we could do, what members could do, is we could amend that condition to take into account the existing residents and to take into account their unique circumstances, because I think at the moment it refers to neighbouring properties or neighbouring residents. So we could amend that so that Highways colleagues can take into account the particular nature of the group in question, and likewise in terms of signposting, having the appropriate signage out on at the construction site, etc. We can put in place measures that ensures that the specific needs of this group are taken into account. So what it means is that we might be a bit more precise in our wording and amend it to suit this group. So we can amend the wording of condition 25. I think 24. And I think in terms of the ongoing engagement, what officers would note is that the applicant has highlighted that this application perhaps is not the end all be all, and that there will be a ongoing discussion with residents, and that came about through the inclusive design review process and the questions around that. So I don't know if Alan wants to jump in and mention what the discussions around the inclusive design review panel were.
Thanks. So I think just to carry on with that subject, obviously this was raised with our new inclusive design review panel back in a meeting in March around some of the ongoing issues with the building, particularly in terms of those items that didn't require planning consent, or those areas, particularly in terms of the external spaces and their design, that will be subject to condition, as is reported in the officer report as it stands. I think at this stage, there was an ongoing commitment from the trust to obviously engage further with the residents and the tenant and resident association, as they have done before the application was submitted, to look at the detail and the specification of those upgraded spaces and making sure that obviously current and future residents' concerns and opportunities are taken on board as part of that process. So I think that's something that was quite refreshing through the panel, that the trust was obviously committed to that as an engagement beyond the formal planning process or the submission of conditions that Denise has just said.
Thank you both for this. And in terms of the needs that have been expressed by the resident tonight, in terms of orientation and helping residents navigate the change that will happen through the construction site, but also in future, what's planned around that?
I think again that will come back into the condition discharge, and again the circumstances being tailored to the existing residents in terms of how the construction phase is managed, but also how that's communicated to them through, as you say, kind of ongoing engagement and negotiation with those residents, as you would expect on other kind of existing housing schemes where you are obviously looking to intensify the use or extend those buildings. I think the other thing as well as part of this application is obviously the existing residents do feature upgrades their own properties through revised glazing arrangements, which hopefully following the construction phase will mean that actually their units are quieter and actually more enjoyable as a consequence of having more thermally and noise efficient fenestration through the proposals, really.
And are those windows, is there a sequence? Are they going to be coming in first before the development commences?
I don't think there's a phasing plan that covers that off, but they will be obviously part of the totality of the development that takes place.
Yeah, but if they don't come before the rest of it, then the impact, the noise reduction impact would be.
I mean, I think it's a difficult one to manage, obviously, in terms of any scaffolding or any external implementation of the scheme. It may be that is something that can be looked at as part of the management plan and construction management overall. But I think again, it will be something that's quite difficult to achieve in terms of the cost of the scaffolding to be erected, firstly to replace the windows, or the sequencing of that in terms of the overall build programme.
Again, sorry to come back to that, and thank you for your answers. I know this is a complex and delicate matter. And I think you are going about it very well, but I do want to push on this question because it's been raised. It was raised in the pack and it was raised by residents tonight, so it is important. Orientation of residents around the works as the works go. I don't know if you know from the trust how it intends to support residents.
We could, through the chair, we could, as under recommendation 2, amend condition 24 and agree that outside committee to word that into the condition that needs to be part of the details. And we could also include that we will, because we wouldn't normally consult on condition details, but we can undertake a commitment to consult with the Residents Association of Pocklington as part of the consideration of the plans and details submitted, because they will know better than us what will work and what won't.
Thank you for that, Matt. Sorry to just come in, Councillor. With condition 24, so bearing in mind, this is a scheme where construction is going to take place above where people already live. And most of the time, the sort of applications that we consider are not that. It's, you know, a different part of the land, or it's a demolition and reconstruction or something of that nature. Given that it is, you know, I'm not sure what the sort of technical terminology is for this kind of a development where you add stories on and there are people still living underneath, is condition 24 in this sort of pack the exactly same wording as it would be for any other kind of development? And if so, I guess my thinking is why? And is there any wording we can just take from other similar sort of applications and apply it to this one?
Through the chair, yes, it's standard wording. I appreciate the point you're making that this is probably a more complex construction program when there's existing people underneath, but we just tailor that in terms of the assessment of the details when they come in to make sure that they deal with that and they convince us. Ultimately, it's a prior to commencement. So if they don't submit those details that satisfy us that people will be protected in terms of their amenity and health and safety, then they simply won't be able to start the development until they convince us of that.
Thank you, Jay. You've raised an important point. So I wouldn't have mentioned co-production at the beginning of my lengthy interventions, apologies to colleagues, to then actually pontificate on this committee, sorry, as a non-disabled person as to what the condition should be and what the residents probably expect. So actually, I don't know if there would be a mechanism, and this is probably the control could happen through the chair in future, but perhaps, Alan, this is one for the Inclusive Design Review panel, as well as the Residents Association, to actually tell us exactly what the condition attached to this or the condition change should be. They will know better than us, and I don't think we should make any assumptions. So I don't know if we can actually, that one's a bit tricky, have a condition that is inserted post decision into a decision whereby we consult the relevant groups on the perfect wording, exactly what are the expectations, or do we give a sort of general umbrella of there should be further just want to make sure we get it right. Basically, do we say something very specific in an amendment that is proposed by this committee, or do we say something very generalist and let officers handle the sort of specificities of what we expect the trust to do?
And just to tack on the end of that, Anissa, you mentioned that the current wording just makes reference to neighbouring properties and that the suggested change could be to include existing residents. So I think what Councillor Short-Verdier is asking, or at least what I'm asking, is would that change of wording be enough to then give officers scope to make any kind of arrangements necessary?
Yeah, I think I just want to echo what Matt said, where the devil is in the detail, which is that once the information is submitted to the council, it will be up to officers to make a judgment as to whether it's adequate or not. So I think if we keep the actual condition itself general and put in a clause in there that requires them to submit that level of information to us, whether we think that goes far enough, then that will be officers' discretion, and it's still, because it's a pre-commencement condition, it gives us that control over whether or not it's adequate enough to commence works.
Thank you. And specifically on Councillor Short-Verdier's point about consulting with the Inclusive Design Review panel, consulting with tenants, can you speak to that, or perhaps any other officers or legal, whoever would like to take it?
So within the actual condition, we can amend it so that we when the condition comes in, we could have a commitment to consult the relevant groups, and then obviously their comments are taken on board and incorporated within the officer's assessment.
Through the chair, I wouldn't recommend we try and agree the exact explicit wording in our committee. You may feel it's worth establishing certain principles of what that amended condition will need to achieve that can be minuted. But yes, there isn't an issue with us, and we have done it before, undertaken a commitment and put that explicitly in the wording of the condition that we will assess it in consultation with X, Y, and Z, in this instance, the residents and the inclusive review panel, if members so wish.
Just to comment on that point, I think with the engagement, I think as Matt says, if we can agree the wording, I think personally the presentation of this scheme back to the inclusive design review panel may not be the most helpful way of trying to resolve these issues. I think the most helpful way would be to ensure that we get that consultation with the Tenant Residents Association. The reason for that being quite clear is the fact that the current makeup of that panel doesn't include any blind or partially sighted people, and I think that's quite important in terms of the user group and the residents as they stand now. So I think if we get the wording right to ensure that the trust and the construction activity does engage with the Tenant Residents Association to ensure that feedback is the right loop to help inform that process, I think that'd be the best route to take it forward, really, rather than the inclusive design review panel. That's not to say it may not be something that we'd look to bring forward in the future if there were new panel members recruited with those specific needs. But I think at this point, we don't have that facility within the panel, really.
Thank you. And so that this can be done under recommendation 2 when we don't need to propose an amendment to a condition. That's what you're suggesting. Is that right? Yeah. Okay, great. Councillor Schwartz-Verdier, go ahead.
Sorry. So just to conclude, there isn't the need to propose an amendment according to.
I think what Matt is suggesting is that you'll delegate authority to the officers to revise condition 24 to take on board measures to safeguard the specific needs of the current residents during construction.
Great. And just having said it in this committee is enough.
Yes.
Good. Okay, then rest my case.
Thank you. And before that amended condition is approved, it comes back to, it needs chair's approval, and is that correct? Yeah. Okay. Okay. Yes. Yeah. Councillor Pascu-Tibere.
This has been an incredibly helpful conversation. I think what might be the really difficult thing for a lot of people is passing through something that has not met with the approval of the residents committee. And I think that's one of the things we're trying to tease out here. Could we go as far as saying that unless sufficient residents, and you can sort of work out what you mean by sufficient, as expressed in the committee, I'm not sure if there's residents who are outside the committee, approve, then this can't go ahead. Because we do need to be doing this thing with them rather than against them. And I'd find it really, really difficult to vote for anything that would be able to say, yes, we'll take regard to the views of the residents, but ultimately they don't have the final say.
Just to clarify, are you talking about residents that are here in the room now with us in this meeting? Or?
No, the residents of
Pocklington Lodge.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Do any officers want to take that?
I think officers would recommend against a condition worded in that way. I'm certainly not mindful of any conditions where we've actually said unless it's signed off by, a certain group or organization. I can understand, the sentiments behind this, but that could be very, very challenging to establish that kind of sign off, that approval. It could, lead to sort of more problems than we're seeking to solve, really. I don't think that's, as officer, I would say, I think the fact that we're doing in consultation, we can certainly, as we would, is demonstrate through the assessment that we've taken on board all the comments made, and where we can't, if you like, address, or the applicant claims they can't for whatever reason, the exact requirements that may have been identified by the residents, we will need clear, strong evidence as to why not, and what is plan B or plan C. But to have an absolute, authority on whether this gets approved on the basis of the residents signing off could really complicate it.
Yeah, thank you. And I guess the point is we have to weigh up the pros and cons and make our judgment as individual committee members here and now. Did you want to come back on that or?
Not at present.
Okay. Councillor Walsh and then Councillor Chabot-Verdier.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to ask a few questions regarding the dog run that is featured in this application. Obviously, guide dogs are fundamental to many of these residents' independence. Firstly, can you clarify the exact size? I know you make reference to it replacing a shed, but what is the actual size of this new dog run?
I'm afraid I don't have the exact measurements of the dog run to hand. I mean, I can bring up the proposed site plan.
What about the previous shed? Do you know how approximately large or small this shed was? Because
the dog run is in that corner right there.
Right. I mean, it's a scale that it's very hard to contextualize.
Absolutely.
And that makes my next question slightly more difficult, which is, do you know approximately how many residents have a guide dog?
We don't have the exact figures, but
a percentage of residents?
Unfortunately not. I think what officers would highlight is that the existing dog run is not in use. That's our understanding. So this is providing a small but some level of provision. What's to note in terms of the overall site location, if I can just bring up, this is Pocklington Lodge itself, but then Ravenscourt Park is within walking distance of the site. So I would presume that residents would have access to Ravenscourt Park, but then what the existing facility is, that there isn't really much. So it's providing some level of.
Yes. So I am a ward councillor for Ravenscourt, and indeed within Ravenscourt Park, there is an existing fenced off dog park. And having worked with residents over my time as councillor for the area, I've come to understand that it is something that is very significant and considered quite important to blind and partially sighted residents, which is why I specifically look at this, because I know that when the dog park was being redeveloped in Ravenscourt Park, a number of concerns were being brought up, namely to do with issues of the fencing itself. Those who are blind and partially sighted may wish to unleash the dogs to give them more freedom so they can move around. But in doing that, they're also conscious about their own ability to monitor their dogs, but also other dogs coming into that space and to break up any potential conflicts between dogs. So materials that are being used, the number of access and ingress and exit to any dog parks as well, but also the materials that are being used. So I have a number of queries regarding, how suitable this is as a provision. Yes, there exists a dog park that is quite well used and quite popular, but you're not really seeming to be able to answer my questions specifically about what's being provided here itself. Can you tell me, for instance, what material the dog park is? Is it going to be a hard surface or is it going to be grass?
So there is a condition attached to the report which secures the hard and soft landscaping details. So I don't have the exact details that you're seeking at the moment, but as part of that condition, we would secure those details. So your comments will be noted, and we'll, as part of the assessment, we'll secure the appropriate details.
Certainly. And on that as well, just about the number of entrances and exits as well, in particular, because for people who are blind and partially sighted, to be able to monitor, particularly when dogs are off lead, that, how many areas they need to be checking, because obviously other people come in, come out, and you cannot not always guarantee that people have closed a gate behind them as well. So being mindful of the practical use, and chiefly because this is such an important part of a person's independence as well. So I just want to make these comments to the committee. Thank you.
Sorry, Councillor, just to come in on that again, this was a key question that was raised at the Inclusive Design Review panel session. Now, the comments again back there around the specification and detailed design of the dog run were again something that the trust were quite open about, the fact that they hadn't fully designed it, and it will be designed in accordance with again consultation and co-production with the Tenant Residents Association. So I think the only issue there may be that if there are future residents who are coming into the extended scheme, that they may not have as much input into the design of those spaces as existing residents who've got, got guide dogs, but ultimately that they would have that input into the design. And as Anissa said, that's subject to the condition relating to the hard and soft landscaping.
Yeah, it's I think come to pass that, existing residents, their own, for want of a better expression, user experience would be mutually beneficial to both existing and potential future residents as well.
Okay, any other questions? Yes, Councillor Pascoe-Tiberi.
This is in relation to the lady who talked quite eloquently about the potential local difficulties encountered by 15 new people moving in. And I think bearing in mind that this has been here since the late 60s and Hammersmith and Fulham residents are a welcoming and kindly lot, that this can be well managed. But is there any possibility of, any additional local engagement with the immediate residents, just to, ensure that this site and its sensitivities are sort of fully taken into account?
In terms of the consultation engagement that you're referring to, within the planning remit, we are trying our best within condition, let's say for 24, to incorporate that engagement. However, how far that goes outside of what planning can control is quite difficult and would be ultimately within the hands of the trust.
Of course, I just sort of make the point here that, say a mail shop to households within a however 100-meter sort of boundary of Pocklington House would be, Pocklington Court Lodge, would be a very useful thing, just to make people aware that these works will be going on, and that there will be sort of new residents, and please pay additional attention to the needs of people who, might need that. So it's not so much something that should necessarily be going as a planning stipulation, but just a model of good practice in what is a sensitive site.
So I imagine that we could incorporate that within, again, condition 24, which is becoming this all-encompassing condition. I'm conscious of that. And as officers, we can be mindful of that. And outside of the site access where they are required to put the notices on, we could tag on a line indicating as such to say that please be mindful of the needs of the existing residents.
Perfect.
Thank you. And I may have misunderstood, but I think what Janet was referring to was an additional 15 people in the building and the added pressures this would have on the staff in the building and the provision of service in the building. So do we have any sort of assurances or undertakings by the trust that they will also increase staff where necessary and things of that nature?
Thank you, Chair. In terms of the staff that you're referring to, my understanding is that the purpose of this site is to provide and support independent living of blind and visually impaired persons. So I don't think that there is 24-hour support or care in that sense. What the agent has confirmed to officers is that there is a contract with the council where 3 days a week somebody from the council comes in and supports existing residents with administrative matters, etc. So that, again, that might be something for the trust to review, and it might be something that you flagged up and that they might reconsider. But within the actual planning application process, I can't see a way where we could incorporate that, unfortunately.
Thank you very much. Are there any further questions? Okay, no further questions. Okay, in that case, we'll move on to voting. Firstly, we'll vote on whether recommendation 1 in the report is agreed, and that is on page 30. Councillor Chabot-Verdier, are you for, against, or not voting?
For.
Councillor Trey?
For.
Councillor Sustis?
Not voting.
Councillor Walsh?
For.
Councillor Pascu-Tibure?
For.
I'll also be voting for. So recommendation 1 has been approved, and that's correct, Councillor Sustis. You recused yourself from this item. Now we move on to recommendation 2, which is also on page 30, bearing in mind everything we've discussed about the actions that will be taken under recommendation 2. Councillor Chabot-Verdier.
For.
Councillor Trey.
For.
Councillor Walsh.
For.
Councillor Pascu-Tibure.
For.
And I'll also be voting for. So that recommendation has been approved. Thank you very much. We now move on to go back to item 4, which is Barons Keep. And Neil, whenever you're ready, please introduce the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So this application relates to Barons Keep on Glidden Road. The application is a variation of a previously approved permission, and it is for minor material amendments to the plans to allow to extend increased size of flats 5 and 8, and alterations to allow amendments to the approved drawings to the profile of the roof extension on the north wing, predominantly on flats 9, 10, and 11, which are yet to be constructed, and to the corner flat 8. You see here, Barons Keep, the 5-storey block of flats located at the junction of Talgarth Road and Glidden Road. It's predominantly horseshoe-shaped development around a central courtyard. There were originally 118 flats. The site is within the Gunter Estate Conservation Area and is a building of merit. Planning permission was approved in 2004 for 11 new flats at roof level, and this is part of that application. It has been implemented. See the aerial photographs here. You can see here on the southern side, the southern and eastern parts of the building have been carried out. Again, you can see here the southern and eastern parts, and they're now looking to continue round to complete the development on the northern side. Oops. Some photographs from within the site, central courtyard, looking towards the eastern part of the development. And then that's the view of Barons Keep from Glidden Road. This is the northern wing, which has yet to be developed. When the application originally came in, the application was submitted because following work with the local residents, it was discovered that the development as approved would have an detrimental impact on the rights of light for the properties to the north of the site. This is the common law matter rather than the planning one, but because of that, they opted to alter the profile on the northern side, predominantly by pulling the facade back by between 2 and 3 meters, depending on which point you may take that measurement on the roof. As a result of pulling the facade back, they had originally intended to provide largest roof extension on that elevation. Now, also the documentation submitted at the time indicated that they had agreement with the residents over the rights of light. It certainly transpired that whilst they were in discussion with the residents, they didn't have an agreement as such, and therefore a number of around about 30 objections were received from the residents, predominantly to the north of the site. As a result, they corrected their documentation to talk that they are in discussion with regards to right of light, and they have opted then to remove the previously proposed roof terraces You do end up with a roof deck, as shown here in yellow, but these roof decks will only be used for maintenance purposes only and not accessible to the flats. That'll be controlled by condition. There are some escape routes to the existing escape stairs for the flats that are again set well back from the boundary, but that would only be used in case of emergency. Yep, so you can see around here, it's been pulled back from all boundaries to protect the residents, or to reduce the impact on the residents. Officers reconsulted once we had the new drawings. We received a few additional objections, but there was nothing significantly new arose from that. I would point out that when the original application was approved, there were no climate measures part of that back 20 years ago as such. I would point out, as you can see in the plan here, there's some air source heat pumps being proposed. There's also PV panels at various sections. These were introduced during a couple of other minor variations to the permission, and they are retained here on this application. So, you know, we are pleased that some of these measures are being included that effectively didn't have to be. Additionally, with the original application, the occupiers of the 11 flats were not eligible for an on-street car parking permit, and that this was controlled by condition at that time. That was our preferred method at that time. It has since proved not to be as efficient as we'd like. So these days we tend to control those matters by a unilateral undertaking, and the applicant has agreed to enter into unilateral undertaking as part of this variation application for the 11 flats. Officers are comfortable with the proposal and feel that the design is still largely in keeping with the original approval, and so you got the elevations do not really change here, just obviously the facade is pulled further back. So officers recommend approval subject to unilateral undertaking and conditions. And then if I could just mention the addendum, there's a couple of there's a changed drawing number for condition 2, and then condition 15 has been deleted and updated just to clarify about the existing roof decks. And then on paragraph 6.1, final line has been deleted because it refers to some alterations that had previously been approved under another variation and had been implemented. So, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Neil. We'll now move on to speakers. I believe we have one speaker, Nick Davey. Whenever you're ready, you have 3 minutes. And if you just press the button on the right-hand side and the mic will go green. Thank you.
Thank you, members. The council granted planning permission to construct 11 flats on the roof of Barons Keep in 2005. And as part of that scheme, the developer has agreed with the tenants to replace the district heating and hot water systems within the flats, refurbish all the common areas, including the stairs and the lift wells, and which were 20 years ago costed over 2 million. Whilst work did commence in the late 2000s, this scheme has been bogged down by delays. First from the credit crunch, then we had to go to appeal to demonstrate that the consent had been implemented, and then we had all the effects of the pandemic. But the first 7 flats on the south and east wings have now been complete and they are occupied. But the final floor flats we've had to put a hold on due to this right of light issue, which your officer has alluded to and has confirmed it's a common law matter, not a planning issue. The way we want to deal with that is to reduce the size of the 4 flats and pull them further away from the northern edge of the building, further away from the residents. But until we get a solution to that, the building remains 2/3 complete. It looks unbalanced, The residents of the 118 flats in Barons Keep continue to live in a building site, and the developer cannot refurbish the 4 stairwells and the lifts that service that wing of the building. The proposed solution, we believe, strikes the best balance between the need to respect the heritage interests of the site, which is locally listed and in a conservation area, and the interests of the Barons Keep tenants and the neighbours. Our only other options are to walk away or to face potentially very expensive High Court action on the right to light issue. The original proposal was supported by the council because of its high quality award-winning design and because it preserved the symmetry of the building. This changes only really affect that symmetry when looked at from plan view from above. From where you can see the whole building, Gildon Road, there is no change. And your council also previously found the original proposals, which can still be built out, do not have a materially adverse impact upon any neighbour. Pulling the extension back from the roof edge will further reduce any impacts. And your officers have confirmed that any concerns about the use of the roof deck can be dealt with by condition. Every other issue raised or objection raised is either not a planning issue or has the same impacts or reduced impacts from the permitted scheme. So finally, members, I particularly ask you have regard to the occupants of the 118 flats at Barons Court. Through no fault of their own, they've lived on a building site for well over 15 years. They're frankly fed up with the disruption caused, and the Residents' Association has written to the council urging this matter be dealt with as quickly as possible. For their sake, I think we've come up with a compromise that's best for all parties, and I hope you can support the recommendation. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you, Nick. Okay, now we move on to questions for officers. Does anyone have any questions? No questions? Okay. In that case, we'll move on to voting on whether recommendation 1 in the report is agreed, and that's on page 12. Councillor Chabot-Verdier?
4.
Councillor Trade?
4.
Councillor Sistus?
4.
Councillor Walsh?
4.
Councillor Bascu-Tibure?
4.
I'll also be voting 4. Now we vote on recommendation 2, which is also on page 12. Councillor Chabot-Verdier?
4.
Councillor Trade?
4.
Councillor Sistus?
4.
Councillor Walsh?
4.
Councillor Bascu-Tibure? 4. I'll also be voting 4. So that has been approved. Thank you very much. Now we will move on to item 6, Triangle Garage. And if Roy, whenever you're ready, if you'd like to present the report, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So this item is an application which relates to development on Triangle Garage site at 2 Bishops Road. The application involves 6 new homes, and I first want to draw members' attention to the addendum. The addendum includes some changes relating to additional conditions. So there's a condition regarding servicing and delivery, a car parking management condition, and some air quality conditions regarding the internal areas of the proposed accommodation. And there are some other minor corrections as well. Okay. So, so here's the site highlighted in red. It's a backline site surrounded on 3 sides by residential properties in Dawes Road, Gironde Road and Bishops Road. The site itself is currently vacant, has been vacant for several years. It was last in use as a garage repair garage. This is an overview of the site from an aerial shot. So what you can see on the left-hand side, obviously, is the site highlighted in red. You can see these U-shaped buildings, which are industrial buildings on the site, and then surrounding properties to the north in Dawes Road, to the south in Gironde Road, and to the east on Bishops Road, where the main frontage to the site is. And then the image on the right-hand corner just basically shows that U-shaped form of the buildings in more detailed format in a sort of a courtyard with the access. This is a sort of montage of different images to try and give you a flavour of what's surrounding the site. So the top left corner is the site entrance, where it's got an undercroft access, vehicular access to the site, and you can see it says garage, and there's some blue signage on the side wall. Beneath that is a image which looks to the other side, and the right-hand side of that image on the bottom left is the Mitre pub, where some public consultation took place with local residents for the site. And then, as you can see in the middle, there's the access with the gate, and that's the undercroft. And then when you get through that gate, you'll see that there's an existing vehicular access with a vehicular parking space on the right-hand side, and then an existing boundary wall, which is about 4 meters, 3.5 to 4 meters high, and that wall would be retained as part of this development, as with much of the or all of the existing boundary walls, which range between 3.5 and 4 meters high. And then the 2 images on the bottom right are just to give you a flavour of the types of properties that are nearby in Dawes Road and Gironde Road. That's it. Okay, so this is a bit of background. So I think I mentioned already there's a U-shaped site. The site has a U shape of buildings on the site. And on the left-hand side, you can see this sort of 3-dimensional image which shows the existing buildings. And then significantly in 2019, there is a long history, but this is the sort of a key decision, I think, that relates to this site. There was an application which was refused by the council under delegated powers in relation to the impact on the properties in Gironde Road in terms of outlook. And significantly, the properties in question are these properties sort of in the north corner, northwest corner. So you've got these 2 back additions, if you like, which have windows in them. Notably, not the first one to the left, but the number 3, number 5, and number 7. All of those properties would, from our perspective at the time, would have been harmed in terms of outlook. And that's principally because this massing of this development that was proposed was 3-storey on this side of the proposal site. And that was compared with the existing buildings, which were effectively 2 stories in that position. So it was increasing bulk. The inspector agreed with that and then dismissed the subsequent appeal in 2021. So that then left a further round of discussions between officers and the applicants, and lots of pre-app discussions. So what you see here now is the proposal, 2 images on the left-hand side, the top one being the refused scheme, if you like, and the bottom one being the proposed scheme, which basically shows a more linear form of development. And significantly, you can see that top left corner, which was included the bulk of development, is now much more open aspect to it, because the bulk has been moved away from that boundary, and the linear form has been pushed towards Dawes Road. So this is just highlighting the relationship between the application site where the bulk of that buildings were previously located. And you can see in that image here in the foreground, you've got numbers 1, 3, 5, and 7, those back additions in Gironde Road. And this area here is now much more open aspect, and significantly, this is a high boundary wall, which is about 4 meters high. So much of the views of the proposed buildings will actually be hidden behind the bulk of the wall. And that's mainly for two reasons. Firstly, because the overall building heights have been reduced. And you can see from the image on the right-hand side in the top corner, that's the bulk which was proposed, which is that blue line. That has now been significantly reduced and shifted away from that boundary on Gironde Road to that location here. And also the buildings have been sunken to about 0.5 meter, as well as a reduction in overall height of about 1 meter. So you get an overall reduction in height of development of 1.5 meters, as well as moving it from the boundary. So it's a much improved outlook for people in Gironde Road. In terms of privacy, because obviously that's another material consideration, normally we have a standard which talks about 18 meters between properties, and the nature of this site is quite unusual in that you've got a narrowing, if you like, towards the north of the site in this image. And that's because just the form of the site is just a triangular shape, an unusual shape. So some of these gardens are smaller. So at this end, the gardens are like 10, or the difference between the gap between the existing and proposed is about 10 meters, whereas this it's about 20 meters. Let's just go back to that image. But so there is an issue of privacy for some of those units potentially. But again, significantly, this boundary wall is 4 meters high and it's being retained. And on the bottom image, you can see the red dotted line. And because of the sunken nature of the design, together with reduced heights and floor to ceiling heights, there would be no impact in terms of privacy to those neighbouring properties in Gironde Road, because the views would be obscured by the wall. Okay. Again, just going on the issue of privacy, let's make this point simply because there is a small alteration to the wall in that if you see the image on the left-hand side, you can see sort of a hashed red area here between numbers 3, 5, and 7. And the boundary wall in that location is slightly lower than some of the others. So in order to ensure that privacy is maintained, there would be an 8 centimeter increase in height on that boundary, albeit from the existing height of the wall, and that existing additional height would actually be sloping away from the neighbouring property. So if you can imagine, this is a cross section between the existing property on the left. This is their garden. This is the boundary wall. This is the garden level, and that's the boundary height. And there's a additional coping stone that's being added for that length between 3 and 5 and 7. Which enables and ensures that there's no overlooking or loss of privacy to those properties between numbers 5 to 9 Gironde Road. And in terms of impact, you can see on this very bottom image in the right-hand corner, that is just a magnification of that relationship. So that little triangle on top of the red dotted lines is effectively the coping stone, and that's it. This is looking at the other side of development. So obviously the development has shifted away from Gironde Road, but it's been pushed towards Dawes Road. And this is Dawes Road. These are the properties that back onto the site. Again, there's a high boundary wall on the boundary of the site, which is between 3.5 and 3.86 meters high. Again, because of the reduction in height through the massing of the building and the lowering of the floor levels, it complies with the 45-degree line. So you can see there's a 45-degree line drawn on the image on this cross section, which is the boundary wall that's being retained. And you can see the proposed buildings are set beneath that. And the blue line is just what was proposed previously. This image is, again, is just trying to tackle the issue of privacy. So the important points here are that the distances between these properties, again, we normally target 18 meters as a minimum separation to ensure privacy. The garden depths and the distance between the proposed elevation facing those gardens is ranges between 8.5 and 13.5 meters. So it's below the 18-meter target, but because of the retained wall at 3.5 meters high and 3.86 meters high, that would largely obscure the views to two of those windows, and also the sunken nature of the site means that those would be obscured. But more importantly, these windows, which you can see on this image here, are bay windows, and they've been designed to include side windows only, and then the elevation which fronts the or opposes the properties in Dawes Road actually don't include any windows. They are timber, if you like, with no windows, and that's to prevent overlooking. So you only get side views, if you like, down along the path that fronts those properties. And again, this is just trying to highlight that point. So on the right top left corner, you've got the boundary wall, which has been retained. On the right-hand side, you've got those window designs, which ensure that the only views are out sideways rather than overlooking the wall. And then you've got the dotted line at the bottom, which shows the height of the retained wall, and then the windows interspersed between in the elevation. Though they're not actually windows, they are timber elements, which actually just part of the design. So there's no overlooking. And again, because it's a complicated site, because you have to go around each of these properties, and we did have a significant number of objections, just trying to make sure we cover all these points. So on Bishop's Road, outlook and privacy you've covered on one slide, but essentially it's this relationship here. On Bishop's Road, we can see there are no windows proposed in that elevation, and significantly, the boundary wall is 4 meters high, again, reduced height. And when you look at this cross section here between that relationship between those properties at number 8, for example, that red line is the 45-degree line. So the proposed developments, the outline shown in black is well within that, and the blue line is the existing buildings, and the red line was what was proposed previously, but essentially it complies with our standards. This is just trying to show some of the floor areas. So basement level, you've got some gardens in the rear, and the properties with accommodation include living areas and kitchen areas in the basement. And you can see the sort of relationship on the boundary between the application site, where this is the boundary wall, Gironde Road, for example, and then this is a lower tiered garden. This is just going to ground floor, showing the living accommodation, which is towards the rear of the site. And also then you've got some kitchen areas, which are at the front of the site. And then this image again is just showing some bedrooms accommodation on the first floor. So it's effectively 3 stories, but 2 stories from ground floor. So then just looking at the roof. So there are some measures which have been included on the roof, which are significant because you've got a green roof, which is included on the roof. These sort of dormer elements, that's additional light to the stairwells. And then this is ventilation and additional light to the bathroom windows in that elevation. But they don't extend the full length of the property, they just appear in little pockets. But significantly, this is a non-major application. You can have a look at paragraph 9.9 and 9.10 to the report, that these are highlighted there. So in terms of what we were trying to seek on this site, normally we try to seek some solar panels and air source heat pumps. But in this case, it was deemed that there would be a negative impact on the bulk and height because of the sensitivity around the scale and massing of the site. So that was something that was excluded from the design, but also because the siting of the solar panels and the air source heat pumps on the roof would have an adverse impact on the efficiency of the green roof itself. And overall, to achieve, or rather the amount of solar panels that could be included was so small that it wouldn't necessarily make that significant difference in this particular case. And obviously we're looking at individual merits of the scheme, and this is one of the considerations. But notwithstanding all that, there are some passive sustainable measures included in the design. For example, there's an east-west orientation, which minimizes heat loss. The windows, a number of windows are south-facing, which ensure that there's direct access to natural daylight. Obviously, the biodiverse roof ensures sustainability measures for runoff, and significantly on this site, where there's lots of hard standing, the suds and permeable arrangements with the paving stones and other measures that have been introduced mean that there's a 93% improvement on the existing. A number of the windows are openable, which result in natural ventilation and prevent overheating, and the building materials are embodied in carbon, and constructions include carbon. So this is just an illustration of the materials that are used. You can see that this elevation facing Dawes Road will include treated timber doors, some stone architraves and stone canopy, reconstituted stone. and glazed windows, and brick, which again is all secured by conditions. So overall, from our perspective, the issues in this site are principally the loss of the employment use, which we consider to be acceptable in this case because the site has been vacant for a long time. It's also adjacent to several residential boundaries, which means that it's actually compatible with the surrounding character and nature of the site. It's a backland site, so there are no heritage constraints. It's not in a conservation area. There are no listed buildings on the site, and we feel that the 2-story scale that's proposed with the basement and it's sunken is acceptable and represents a visual improvement on what's there at the moment. Recognise that there were several objections to the proposal. We feel that all those objections have been addressed, and significantly the reasons for refusal that were highlighted by the inspector have very much been addressed in this revised scheme by the reduced height and lowered massing. There's no harm in terms of residential amenity to the neighbouring properties. The quality of the accommodation is acceptable. It's car-free. There are no objections subject to conditions from our highways colleagues, and on this particular site there would be a seal for local authority of some £450,000. In addition, we've secured an extra £156,000 for the public rail and employment skills, as well as obviously through the Section 106 car-free monitoring, construction and air quality, and a crossover will be secured. Okay. So officers are recommending approval. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. Now we have a couple of speakers. We've got Stephanie Dodson and Ross Powell-Jones. Whenever you're ready, if you'd like to come to the table, and you have 5 minutes between you, however you'd like to split that up. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Chair, members. This proposal seeks to redevelop a vacant site on previously developed land and provide much needed homes. The scheme for this site has evolved to ensure that all former issues have been conclusively resolved. Key features of the redesign proposals are summarised as follows. Centralisation of the built form within the site, creating greater physical separation to the properties along Geelong Road. Introduction of a Muse Street to maintain separation to the properties in Dawes Road. Sinking of the ground floor level to lower the height of the built form, which remains well below the height of all neighbouring dwellings and below the existing garage roofline, and oblique openings in bay windows to respect the visual privacy of dwellings in Dawes Road by preventing overlooking. The proposal is the result of extensive local engagement. This has also included a pre-app meeting with officers and a public consultation event. The engagement recognised a marked improvement from the previous versions of the scheme. The scheme will deliver numerous public benefits, namely bringing a vacant site occupied by redundant industrial facilities back into viable use within a sustainable central London location, contributing to the delivery of 6 new family dwellings, positively responding to housing need. A complementary residential land use that is fitting with the established residential context to replace an incompatible industrial use that would, if reoperated, conflict with residential amenity. The architectural design and layout will provide a positive contribution to the character of the local area. Passive design principles and incorporation of sustainably sourced and high-performance materials, energy-efficient and water-saving devices, and sustainable drainage features. Biodiversity net gain through the inclusion of green roofs, garden spaces, and planting. 16 cycle spaces to encourage active travel. Car-free development except for one accessible space. Remediation of the site and removal of asbestos, seal plus significant Section 106 contributions. To conclude, the scheme will deliver a number of distinct public benefits, providing new homes in this part of the borough exemplar in both terms of architecture and sustainability. This is supported by planning policy. We hope members agree with your officer's recommendation for approval and support this application. I will now hand over to our architect Ross to just run through some of the key design features. Thank you.
Thank you. This series of 6 houses have been designed with a careful analysis of the site's immediate and wider context. Their modest scale draws on the surrounding pattern of Victorian terrace housing while updating them to meet current space standards. To ensure the homes can meet the long-term needs of future residents, each contains 2 living spaces. At the lower level, a connected living kitchen dining space extends out to a private garden, while a more formally proportioned living space is located at the entrance level, allowing for more flexible inhabitation. The massing has been positioned at the centre of the site to ensure an equal relationship to each of the 3 neighbouring streets. At 2 stories above ground, the homes nestle into this backland site, sitting subserviently to the surrounding 3-storied street-facing terraces. Windows have been sensitively placed and orientated to avoid direct overlooking to each of these neighbours. To the south, windows sit at an oblique angle to those on Bishop's Road and Durand Road and are screened by the tall existing boundary wall. To the north, a highly crafted timber bay echoes the local architectural features and directs views away from properties on Dawes Road. Along the site's northern edge, an inviting and convivial Mew Street, lined with active front doors, will encourage moments for neighbourly interaction and foster a sense of community. This urban approach allows the homes to orient south, maximising their access to natural light and forming generous amenity spaces. Large glazed windows will integrate seating, enlivening the Mew Street and bringing natural light down to the lower level through a generous light well. The architectural character speaks to both the context-rich heritage and the site's industrial past. A simple but robust palette of materials and highly crafted elements have been composed in the elevation to form an engaging and characterful place that will positively enhance the local area's distinct identity. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much both. Thanks for your time. Thank you. Okay, now we move on to questions for officers. And do we have any questions? Yep, Councillor Trey.
Hello, actually, thanks very much for the presentation. And I think overall it looks like an excellent construction. The couple of questions I have might actually be for the architect. The first one is drainage, you know, just thinking of the downpours we had yesterday. And you were just by taking it down at half level, to me, it looks like you're creating a perfect storm of all the water pouring into one area, but I'm sure you've probably taken that into account. But my other concern is that you're introducing 6 new gas boilers probably into these 6 new homes, and wouldn't there be space for air source heat pumps in the gardens based on our 2030 goal of net zero, and that this is a perfect opportunity whilst building new to have taken that into consideration when putting in the planning. So air source heat pumps, yes, on the roof take a lot of space, but you know, the sacrifice in Fulham of a bit of garden. I mean, I live in Fulham myself and have a tiny garden, and I've considered air source heat pump for the next upgrade, and I pass that back to the developers really, that that the gardens could incorporate that.
Thank you. We'll see if officers can answer those questions. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, through the chair, I mean, this obviously is an application which we have to consider on its merits, and it's not a major application. There's no obligation to sort of whilst our major schemes have aspirations or certainly policy requirements to achieve, you know, the standards for climate change on major sites, is not the same requirement on smaller sites. So we have supplementary planning policies which set out obligations. We obviously have our SBD which sets out a climate agenda. As a council, we're very, you know, much focused on that green agenda, and I think as officers we're very much aware of that. So, you know, our website sort of designed and geared to that to try and encourage people to make those retrospective changes to properties. And in this particular case, although it's not included in the design, it doesn't negate the fact that the future occupiers of this development could include those air source heat pumps at ground floor level, for example. And then, for example, you mentioned the potential flooding and the sinking the levels down. In terms of construction, a construction method statement has been submitted with this application, which is a requirement for any application which involves the creation of a basement. And basically that means that it has to, you know, be built to certain standards, and it's not something covered by planning but building control. But from our perspective, what it means is that that has been considered at an early stage in the design, and also it's been considered by a approved building control surveyor or building surveyor engineer that's actually carried out that assessment. In addition to that, the SUDS submissions that have been provided by the applicants, you know, I mentioned earlier on that there's some paving that's proposed, because the site itself, when you look at it, it's all hard standing. So when you look at actually what's being done, the measures that are being put in place means that actually 93% improvement in terms of permeability. They've got water tanks, and then the water tanks then lead into sewage pipes, which are on nearby on street. So that has been thought through, and that's the fact that they haven't included measures now doesn't negate the fact that you could include them in the future. Okay.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. That's a really good clarification. Again, I go back to the architect because absolutely in future somebody could to put an air source heat pump at ground level, but that would also mean that the architects would have to have pre-thought out the internal heating situation of each property so that the correct radiators, etc., were in place for the sort of percentages that you could create with the air source heat pumps. But potentially in 10 years' time, the air source heat pumps would be better anyway.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Walsh.
Thank you. Just firstly, regarding the green roof, can you confirm that, because obviously privacy has been brought up as a substantial concern by neighbouring residents, that the new residents will not be able to access the through the skylight or window light, whatever you call it, the green roofs for kind of their own residential use?
Yes, I can confirm that's the case. They're not accessible. There are some roof lights there which provide, you can see on this image, there's a strip of roof lights.
Yeah, so it's for lighting purposes only. There's no residential purpose.
There's no access. Yeah.
And just on that note as well, because it's quite a tight site, where will the access for servicing of the green roof take place? Because I'm conscious of how narrow a site this is.
I mean, those details haven't been submitted at this stage, but you can imagine there are ways and means. There are some flat roof areas within the site, which means that, for example, this northern part of the site, on this image, if you see the image on the screen, there's a flat roof there, which, had been proposed as a roof terrace, and we suggested that would be excluded from the scheme because it could create noise and disturbance from neighbouring properties. So that is an access point which could be used to access the roof.
The reason I bring this up is obviously partly to do with the accessibility of the space and how it may be used once development is finished, but crucially as well is the retention of the green roof, that it be retained in a good state for years to come, because obviously this will be somewhat visible, I think, if I'm right in saying, from the highest levels of the neighbouring properties. Moving along then, just a question regarding the construction logistics. Obviously this sits within as I say, quite a narrow site. You demonstrated earlier that the access point is through another residential building. So I'm assuming that the excavation, the servicing of this site is going to take place mainly on the road itself. Which road is this going to be?
So I'll just go back to the plan. I can show you here the images at the beginning. So the site is a backland site, but there is an access road from the main road to the rear of the site. And that access point is here.
Yeah.
And then obviously you're going to have, an undercroft area here. So there will need to be some vehicles on the road, but there is a condition to see details of how that will be achieved for this particular development. And as I think you've discussed earlier, the details of that will need to be submitted to us for our approval.
Yeah, because obviously, for those, been on this committee for a while, we have had, for want of a better expression, awkward shaped sites come to committee, which have included substantial detail of the construction logistics plan, because it has factored into a number of residential concerns, typically about how the construction is going to impact residents. For instance, as you say, some of the servicing is going to have to take place on the street. Will this involve suspension of parking bays, and for what length of time?
Again, it's a bit early to say at this stage, but that's certainly information we would request from the applicants. And once they provide that to us, we will consult with our colleagues in highways, because with all these schemes, we're talking about an urban area. and this is a backland site in an urban area. It's not unusual. There are sites which like this that get developed, but obviously with the use of a condition, appropriate condition, which in this case would be a construction, management plan, construction logistics plan, to get those details to us before they commence work, that would be the normal route that we would go down. And I think, having consulted with our highways colleagues on this matter, they were satisfied that a condition would achieve that.
Understandably, and I will put forward then just as a comment about the need for these to be developed further in more detail to be available in it, because it does seem like this is going to be an area that is going to be quite impactful on neighboring residences throughout the construction phasing. But post construction, obviously the new residents move in. Will this still be the access point for servicing of the site? I'm assuming for deliveries, taxis, whatever else.
Yeah, so it would still be the access point because it's the only access point to the main road, basically. And on the addendum, there's an additional condition which seeks service and delivery plan to be submitted to the council prior to occupation. So again, to safeguard the amenity of the neighbouring occupiers as well as proposed new occupiers. So and again, it's a normal route.
It's a little bit frustrating not to have those details available yet, because obviously these I would consider to be quite substantial issues. And obviously, I'm sure you guys will secure this at a later date, but it would have been helpful to understand that at this committee.
I mean, normally, yeah, okay, yeah.
Thank you.
And Roy, is that that access point wide enough for a car to go down?
Not after, well, at the moment it is, yes, because
after the
you've got a garage that's there at the moment, and so they would have been used for servicing. But then the garage, the width of it, there would be no. It's an access point for the front of the properties, and it's a pedestrian access. So the vehicular access would only be for this disabled space here in the corner. And because of the building that's there, number 4 Bishop's Road, and the nature of the undercroft, you wouldn't necessarily be able to get large vehicles beyond the undercroft anyway. So yeah, it's not realistic. So it would be small vehicles that we might get to the front part, but that would be it. And to be quite honest, there's a additional condition on about the use of the disabled bay as well, restricting that. So servicing would largely need to be done from the road, and that's why we've got this condition attached.
Okay, great. Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Pascoe-Tibore.
Thank you very much. Obviously aware this has been a garage since the 50s when, shall we say, modes of servicing vehicles weren't maybe as advanced as they are now. That means the land is quite likely to be pretty heavily contaminated. Just wanted to know if extra special attention has been paid to that, especially because you're going to be digging quite deep, so potentially uncovering lots of unpleasant stuff.
Yeah, I mean, our contaminated land team have looked at this, and they are in-house specialists on contamination. And as you would expect, the applicants, there's a suite of conditions that have been attached to the application. So if you see on page 81 of the report, there's a preliminary risk assessment that will need to be carried out before any work can be done. And that needs to be done, basically before they start any work. And there's a whole series of other conditions related to contamination, which would safeguard the health of the occupiers and of neighbouring properties.
Thank you very much. And you'll obviously be digging quite a big hole where previously there has been a wall. That will mean that a lot of houses on Durand Road won't necessarily have a rear wall. What's being done to fix that?
Well, the wall is being retained. So, yes, there's going to be some works done and carried out. And whilst the work's being carried out, they've submitted a construction method statement which shows that the walls will be retained and, and certainly will be reinstated. So that's part of the construction method statement. And that's also be part of the construction management. So we will know more when the time comes. But at this point in time, we just know that it's going to be retained.
And is that wall going to be stable with quite a lot of land missing from one side? We know that these walls tend to have been built when, things were quite cheap and cheerful.
Yeah, I mean, it will be required to meet building control standards, any excavation works, and the reason why we put the condition on about about, or we put a policy requirement for construction method statements for these very concerns that you raised. That's why we try to address it through policy by having a construction method statement submitted as part of the planning submission, so that these matters are considered at an early stage. So, and then they will follow through as part of the development through the building control process.
Great, thank you very much. Interesting development on a very small site. Could be exciting.
Thank you. Any other questions? Nope, no further questions. Okay, we'll move to voting on whether recommendation 1 is agreed. That's on page 74. Councillor Schwartz-Verdier?
4.
Councillor Tray?
4.
Councillor Suslus?
4.
Councillor Walsh?
4.
Councillor Pascu de Bure? 4. I'll also be voting 4. Now you vote on recommendation 2, which is also on page 74. Councillor Schwartz-Verdier?
4.
Councillor Tray?
4.
Councillor Suslus?
4.
Councillor Walsh?
4.
Councillor Pascu de Bure? 4. I'll also be voting 4. So that application has been approved. Thank you very much. We move now finally to item 7, Quennington Mansions. And I'm advised that councillors Schwartz-Verdier and Suslus will not be participating in this item. Legal, if you'd like to explain why, and then Tom, whenever you're ready, introduce your report. Thank you.
The reason being, this is a matter that is being brought back to committee, and the two councillors were not present at that first meeting, and so didn't have the opportunity of hearing the objectors and the full presentation. Okay.
Thank you, Chair. So as just discussed, this application relates to Quennington Mansions, and it was previously considered at the last planning committee on the 4th of June. It relates to various works to retrofit the building in order to improve its energy performance and introduce renewable energy sources. At the last meeting, the committee resolved to agree the officer recommendation and grant planning permission. The application has been brought back to committee. Unfortunately, there was an error on the original block plan, which meant some of the measurements quoted in the committee report were incorrect. This was actually due to the ordnance survey data not being quite correct. Unfortunately, yeah, we noticed after committee, and we asked the applicant to update the block plan so that it showed accurately the situation with the neighbour on the site. So you can see here the two block plans. So on the left-hand side is the original block plan, and the particular neighbouring building we're concerned with is Hazelwood Mansions. So if you can see here, the side elevation and its proximity to the boundary with Quennington Mansions, this is as it was originally shown, and you can see over here it's slightly closer, which is the actual situation inside. And this is a change of 0.7 metres. Compared to what was originally quoted. So based on this, paragraph 9.5 of the original report would have needed to be updated to reflect a separation distance of approximately 7.2 metres between the plant enclosure and this neighbour, rather than 7.9 metres. So just in terms of the main thing to consider here, we're obviously looking at the impact on the amenity of the neighbour at Hazelwood Mansions. In order to do this, particularly in terms of light and outlook, we apply a test from Key Principle HS7, where we use a 45-degree line taken from any side-facing windows to see whether or not the proposed development would breach that line and potentially result in a significant impact. So on the left-hand side here, you can see the line drawn based on the original block plan. And on the right-hand side, you can see it drawn with the updated block plan. In both instances, the air source heat pump enclosure significantly passes this test. And you can also see the actual impact is very limited compared to the dimensions set out originally. However, we wanted to ensure that that members were aware of the accurate dimensions when making the final decision. So ultimately, in terms of the report, whilst that dimension changes, the analysis and conclusions remain the same, and the recommendation is to approve as set out in the original report. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Do we have any questions? Nope. Okay, now we move on to voting on recommendation 1, which is on page 112. Councillor Tray?
4.
Councillor Walsh?
4.
Councillor Pascu de Bure?
Against.
I'll be voting 4. And recommendation 2, which is also on page 112. Councillor Tray?
4.
Councillor Walsh?
4.
Councillor Pascu de Bure? For. And I'll also be voting for. So that application has been approved. Thank you very much. Thank you to everyone for attending or watching or participating in tonight's meeting. The draft minutes will be published on the website shortly, and they'll be formally approved at the next meeting on the 17th of September, 2024. As always, if you have any questions or queries concerning the applications, please contact the case officer in the application.